Hello everyone, today I'll continue telling you the story about the single mother, Diệu Hân. I hope you enjoy the video. Life after her father's funeral flowed gently for Diệu Hân, like a stream of cool water. Although the pain was still there, pouring her whole heart into rebuilding the old school, where her father had devoted half his life, helped heal her in ways she never expected. Every morning she stood in the unfinished schoolyard with a warm cup of coffee in hand, the mist still clinging to the grass. Watching the workers start their day, the steady sound of hammers, the smell of fresh cement drifting in the breeze, Hân felt as though her father was somewhere nearby, watching every step she took. Sometimes she would smile softly, whispering in her heart, "Dad, I'm doing the right thing. I won't let your dedication go to waste." But peace, as always, is fragile, and sometimes it breaks in the most unexpected ways. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and washed the schoolyard in pale golden light, Hân returned home from the construction site. Sweat still clung to her forehead, her clothes lightly dusted with lime powder. She looked every bit the woman juggling countless responsibilities. But the moment she stepped through the gate, she froze. Standing at her door was a woman in her 40s, dressed far too luxuriously for the humble surroundings. Her hair was permed to perfection, her tight dress and high heels making her look sharp, almost thorny. Her bright red lips curled slightly as her cold eyes swept over Hân, judging, measuring. Beside her stood a young woman, around Hân's age or slightly younger. Her expression was hard to read, nervousness flickered in her eyes, yet her mouth was set as if clinging to a fragile sense of pride. Hân's heart skipped a beat. A sense of dread crept through her. The older woman locked eyes with her and spoke first, her voice shrill and dripping with self-importance. "Are you Diệu Hân?" Hân nodded cautiously, still not understanding what was happening. "Good. I'm Mr. Hoa's second wife." She said it bluntly, without a hint of courtesy, without even offering condolences for the man who had passed. "I heard he died, and left his assets to you." A chill ran down Hân's spine. Her father had spoken of this second wife, only briefly, with sorrow and regret. "The mistake of my life," he had once said. Before Hân could react, the woman took a step closer, her voice turning sharper. "My daughter here is also Mr. Hoa's biological child. She has the right to her share. Don't think that just because you're the eldest, you get to keep everything." The young girl beside her remained quiet, but something flickered in her eyes, hope, jealousy, or fear. Hân stepped back slightly, trying to keep calm. I never planned to take anything. My father." But the woman cut her off with a sneer. "Father? You're sure? There's no proof you're even his daughter. For all we know, you only showed up to claim the inheritance." A loud roar exploded inside Hân's head. Each word felt like a slap to her dignity, to the sacred bond she cherished with her father. The world tilted slightly. She steadied herself by gripping the doorframe. "What you're saying is too much," Hân whispered, her eyes reddening. "My father knew exactly what he wanted to leave behind. I trust his decision." The woman scoffed, her laughter sharp as a blade. "Trust? Then show proof. If needed, we'll do a DNA test. If needed, we'll split the inheritance. My daughter won't lose her share just because you managed to please him in his final days." Her words stabbed straight into Hân's chest. She stood frozen. Inside her pocket, her father's final letter, filled with love, regret, and apology, was crushed tightly in her hand. He had written, "You are the most precious thing I lost for too long. I leave everything to you not out of obligation, but because you are my family." But now, standing before her, was a woman trying to rip all that away, denying blood, love, and the dying wishes of the man she had cherished. The evening deepened, the wind picked up, and the sky shifted to a deep orange. It should have been peaceful, yet everything felt suffocating. The woman crossed her arms, her tone challenging. "Well, what will you do? We have rights. And I won't let my daughter be at a disadvantage." Hân lifted her head, despite the pain stabbing her heart. "What do you want me to do?" Her voice trembled but didn't break. "It's simple. Either take a DNA test immediately, or divide the assets by law. And if you refuse..." Her lips curled coldly. "I'll sue. And I won't stop." The air felt strangled. Hân felt the ground shift beneath her feet, dragging her into a storm she never prepared for. The school her father left her wasn't even built yet. The grief of losing him hadn't healed. And now she was being forced into a brutal battle over identity, inheritance, and truth, with the very woman her father had spent years trying to avoid. And worst of all, a terrifying possibility rose in her mind. Did her father hide something from her? Was there a past she never knew? After the confrontation at her door, Dieu stood in silence for a long time, the shadows of the two women still haunting her vision as they strutted away, their arrogance like a declaration that the storm had only just begun. The sharp clack of the woman's high heels echoed like cuts against Han's heart. The younger girl walked slower, her hesitant expression like someone dragged into a war she didn't fully understand. When the door finally closed, Han leaned against the wall, her hand tightening around her father's letter until its corners crumpled. Her life, barely finding peace after her father's death, had been ripped apart in one afternoon, and she had no idea that within a single day, the entire village would be drowned in rumors seeded by that woman's venomous tongue. The next morning at the market, Han stiffened when she heard the whispers. That girl? People say she's not even Mr. Hoa's real daughter. Not a real daughter, yet she holds the inheritance? Who would believe that? The dead are easily deceived. One woman even looked straight at her and said with fake pity, "Poor Mr. Hoa, tricked at the end of his life." The basket in Han's hands trembled. Her throat tightened painfully. She paid quickly and hurried away, avoiding their probing eyes, but the whispers clung to her like shadows. What Han didn't know was why the rumors spread so fast. At the tea stall near the village entrance, her stepmother, Mrs. Trin, was casually fanning herself while dripping poison into eager ears. I approached her kindly, yet she acted guilty, she said, her tone calm as if stating facts. Then she added sweetly but venomously, "Who knows if that will of his is even real? She's not his real daughter. Everyone in the village can see that." Her words were like oil to a fire. Beside her, Quynh, her daughter, looked uneasy but stayed silent, too afraid to contradict her mother. "We only want justice for Mr. Hoa," Mrs. Trin concluded, her voice honeyed yet venomous. By midday, the rumors had spread through every winding path of the village. That afternoon, when Han arrived at the school construction site, she felt unfamiliar eyes on her. A few workers muttered, "Not sure if we're working for the right person. What if there's a lawsuit?" An older worker approached gently, but even his concern cut deep. "Hun, we've heard a lot about this inheritance and identity issue. Are you all right?" She forced a thin smile. "I can handle it, uncle." But when he turned away, her eyes reddened again. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of her bed and opened her father's letter once more. His shaky handwriting felt like a final embrace. "You are the most precious thing in my life. I didn't leave you assets out of duty, but because you are my family." Tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink. But instead of comfort, the words twisted the knife deeper, because this sacred love was now being mocked, doubted, dragged through the mud. And Mrs. Trin knew exactly where to hurt her most. The true blow came the next afternoon when Mrs. Trin returned to Han's home, this time bringing two unfamiliar men who looked like hired enforcers. Hands on her hips, she smirked. "Planning to hide forever? Better split the assets legally. If not, don't blame me for going hard." Han tried to stay calm. "I'm not trying to fight anyone. But what my father left." "Father?" Mrs. Trin laughed loudly, dripping disdain. "Not confirmed. If you want the truth, let's do a DNA test." Quynh tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, please stop saying that." But Mrs. Trin yanked her hand away. "You stay out of this. You're the real daughter. Why should you stand behind her?" Then she stared at Han, her eyes sharp as knives. "The whole village believes me. One lawsuit and you'll lose everything." Han stood still, her knuckles turning white from how tightly she clenched her fists. The humiliation, the pain, the injustice, everything piled up like a weight on her chest. She realized that if she stayed silent, they would keep pushing. They would keep insulting her father, keep destroying her name, keep trying to break her. And even though her heart ached so badly she could barely breathe, Han knew one thing for certain. It was time for her to stand up. When Mrs. Trin's threats were still echoing in the suffocating air of the front yard, Dieu just stood there, motionless, like a tree battered by storm winds yet stubbornly refusing to break. Her hands were trembling visibly, but her eyes tried to remain calm even though her heart felt like it was shattering inside. The two men standing behind Mrs. Trin stared at her with a threatening look, making the atmosphere even heavier. Everything was pressing down so much that she felt she might collapse at any moment. But just then, the sound of a familiar motorbike engine came from the gate, and the person who appeared made both Mrs. Trin and the two men freeze. Ton stepped into the yard, his helmet not yet removed. His expression darkened immediately as he took in Han's pale face and the chaos before him. He didn't say anything at first, just walked quickly over to her and placed his hand gently but firmly on her shoulder, as if to let her know she was no longer standing there alone. His voice sank low, controlled but heavy. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Trin instantly switched her attitude, trying to act like the victim. "Ah, Ton, you came at the right time. I'm here to talk some sense into this girl. She's usurping the inheritance my husband left for my daughter. I'm here to demand justice." Ton shot her a sharp glance, then turned back to look at Han with deep concern. She tried to say something, but her voice caught in her throat, and he understood immediately. He turned fully toward Mrs. Trin, positioning himself in front of Han like a solid wall. "You can say whatever you want, but you do not get to insult Han." He spoke plainly, his voice calm but noticeably colder. "Who are these two men? Why are they coming to someone's house like this to intimidate her?" The two men shifted awkwardly under Tana's cold gaze, while Mrs. Trin was taken aback that he clearly wasn't on her side the way she had hoped. She tried to maintain her arrogant composure. "This has nothing to do with you, Ton. I just want to clarify her background. It's not even certain she's really Mr. Hoa's daughter. There has to be a DNA test. The inheritance must be divided." Before she could finish, Ton raised an eyebrow, his voice sharp as a blade. "You don't have the right to conclude anything. Who receives what the will says, that's for the law to decide. Not your mouth." The whole yard fell silent. Mrs. Trin's face blanched. She hadn't expected him to speak so bluntly. Han could only stand there, staring at him in stunned silence, her heart feeling as if he had just touched its softest place. Ton turned to her again, his voice now much softer, warm and steady. "Go inside. Let me talk to them." Han started to shake her head. She didn't want to cause more trouble, but the resolute look in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. He looked at her as if to say, "Han, don't be afraid anymore. Let me handle this." As soon as she stepped inside, Ton turned back to face Mrs. Trin, and his expression changed completely. No more gentleness, no more restraint, only sharpness and an uncompromising protectiveness. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Han is not faking anything, and you don't get to use rumors to tarnish her reputation. You want to sue? Go ahead. We're not afraid." Mrs. Trin narrowed her eyes. "And what are you to her that you defend her so fiercely?" Ton answered without hesitation. "I'm the one who will stand by her to the end." For a brief moment, she stared at him as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The two men with her also began to waver under his presence. He continued, his voice not loud but carrying the weight of a verdict. "If you keep slandering her, spreading lies, or bringing people here to pressure her, I'll ask the local authorities to step in immediately, and you will be held responsible." The confidence in his words made, for the first time, fear creep into Mrs. Trin's expression. She glared around, then pointed towards Han's house with a huff. "Fine, I'll let this go for today. But this isn't over." Ton answered her with a cold look that made her swallow whatever else she had been about to say. When mother and daughter finally left the yard, he let out a long breath and went inside. Han was standing in the living room, her eyes still glistening with tears, her hand clutching her father's letter, as if it were the last source of strength she could hold on to. Ton walked up to her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She shook her head, and the tears began to fall again. He pulled her into his arms, saying nothing more, just holding her tightly as if to steady her world. And in that moment, for the first time since everything had happened, Han no longer felt completely alone. In the days after that confrontation in the front yard, Han thought things might finally calm down, because Ton had stepped in to defend her so clearly and firmly. But she had no idea that the quiet that followed was only a brief pause before the real storm struck. Not only did Mrs. Trin refuse to back down, she became more covert and more dangerous. It all began one morning when Han arrived at the construction site of the old school. As soon as she reached the gate, she saw a small group of villagers standing together, pointing and whispering. A man walked up to her hesitantly and said, "Han, you should go see the back of the school. Something's happened." She hadn't even had time to ask before familiar murmurs rose around her again. Probably got caught using the money for the wrong purpose. "I told you she's not necessarily clean. Mr. Hoa left her the money, and she uses it to build a school just to show off." Han's heart clenched. Her steps felt like they were made of stone as she walked around to the back of the school. And then she froze. The neatly stacked construction materials from the day before had been torn apart, as if someone had deliberately tried to wreck everything. Cement bags were slashed open, sand was shoveled and scattered into the drainage ditch, several good wooden beams were broken in half. Shoe prints and torn plastic littered the ground. But what stunned her most were the colored posters plastered all over the walls. Pictures of her at the school, pictures of her holding the design plans, and below them in bold red letters, "Fraud, misusing inheritance funds." Han's hand shook violently. Her breath snagged in her throat as if something were choking her. One of the workers looked at her with sympathy and said quietly, "Last night 2 strangers came on motorbikes. They were wearing helmets and masks, so we couldn't see their faces." Han knew immediately who it was. Her fingers turned icy. The pain in her chest was so intense she couldn't form words. The rumors had grown heavier each day, and what happened that morning was undeniable proof that Mrs. Trin had no intention of stopping. Han tried to steady the workers, told them to take the morning off to avoid stirring more trouble, then quietly headed back home. But when she reached her gate, she realized it still wasn't over. On her door was a notice. Request to temporarily suspend construction. Suspected misuse of assets. Signed, Anonymous Complaint. Han sank down on the doorstep, pressing her hand to her forehead. She knew very well, no one else could have done this. It had to be Mrs. Trin, a woman who had once stepped through her father's life, destroyed his happiness, and now was trying to destroy the last thing he had left for her. She was trying to breathe deeply to calm herself when she heard the sound of another motorbike pulling up at the gate. She looked up. This time it wasn't Tan. It was Quynh, Mrs. Trin's daughter. The girl stood at the gate for a few seconds, gripping the handle of her bag tightly, her face full of hesitation. Finally she spoke first. "Han, could I talk to you for a moment?" Han sighed. She didn't think she had any strength left to face anyone connected to that household. But the look in Gwen's eyes, uncertain, tinged with guilt, made it hard for her to turn away. She opened the gate. Gwen walked in and stood there for a long moment before speaking in a trembling voice. "What happened at the school? It wasn't me." "I'm sorry." Han didn't answer. She knew it hadn't been Gwen, but she also couldn't forget what that girl's mother had done. Gwen clenched her hands and went on. "My mom, she's really angry. She keeps saying you're trying to take everything. I know that's not true, but my mom, she won't listen to anyone." Han closed her eyes, her heart aching all over again. "Why do you all have to do this? My father just died." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Gwen lowered her head. "I know, but my mom isn't really after the inheritance." Han's head snapped up, confusion flooding her face. Gwen took a deep breath, her voice so small it was almost inaudible. "My mom wants to ruin you." The sentence felt like a knife thrust straight into Han's chest. "Ruin her? Why?" Gwen lifted her eyes to meet Han's, her own eyes reddening. "My mom says you look like my dad's old flame. The woman she always believed destroyed her marriage." Han was completely stunned. She had never known this. She had never imagined that she was being crushed under the weight of wounds that didn't even belong to her. Wounds from a past that existed long before she was ever part of the picture. Gwen continued. "What happened at the school, the posters, the rumors, I think all of that was my mom. I'm sorry for letting things go this far." Han still couldn't speak. Her emotions were a tangled storm. Shock, pain, anger, pity, and a suffocating sense of injustice. Gwen looked at her, her voice shaking. "I came to warn you. My mom is planning something bigger. She said she'll make sure you're no longer qualified to continue rebuilding the school." Those final words left Han speechless, her lips parting and then closing again without a sound. In that moment, she understood that this fight was no longer just about inheritance or baseless rumors. Mrs. Trin had made up her mind to destroy her, completely. And the most terrifying thing of all was, she had no intention of stopping. When Quynh left, Dieu Han stood frozen for a long time in front of the half-closed gate. The words Quynh had spoken kept echoing in her head like wind whistling through a narrow crack. "My mother wants to ruin you." Each word was sharp and cold, slicing into her heart like a blade. Han tried to move her feet toward the house, but her whole body felt hollow, her hands too weak even to close the door. She sank into a chair, staring blankly into the empty space before her. Since her father's death, she had never felt so exhausted, not from work, but from being crushed and ripped apart for reasons she had never caused. A familiar motorbike stopped at the gate, jolting her out of her daze. Tan hurried inside without knocking, calling out loudly, "Hun, are you home?" Hearing his voice made her eyes sting. She didn't even have time to answer before he stepped in, worry etched across his entire face. The moment he saw her lifeless expression, he stopped asking questions and immediately strode toward her, gently taking her cold hand into his warm one. "Who did something to you again?" His voice dropped, laced with both worry and anger. Han shook her head, but tears still streamed silently down her cheeks. Tan sat beside her, slid a hand through her hair, and pulled her gently against his shoulder. He could smell the grief on her, that familiar scent of fatigue and sadness, as if everything she had been holding together was about to collapse right in his arms. Softly, with a trembling voice, Han whispered, "Tan, I'm so tired. I don't know how much longer I can keep going." His chest tightened. He hated seeing her like this. This woman who was normally strong, independent, and never complained. He tightened his hold on her, trying to give her the steadiness she had lost. "I already know everything," he said quietly but firmly. "I went to the school. I saw the damage. I saw those posters. I know it was her." Han opened her red, tear-filled eyes and looked up at him. Tan continued, his tone turning sharp. "And I swear to you, I won't let her do anything else." It wasn't an empty promise. It was resolve. It was anger. It was the fierce protectiveness born from deep feelings he had held for her for a long time. Han wanted to protest. She didn't want Tan dragged into the mess, didn't want him getting into trouble, but before she could speak, he cut her off, his voice deep and unwavering. "Don't tell me I'll handle it myself anymore. You've been handling everything yourself your entire life. But me." He paused, and his eyes softened into something deeper, something that reached straight into her pain. "I'm here to handle things for you." Han felt her chest tighten, part from emotion, part from fear. She feared he would get hurt. She feared he would get entangled. She feared Mrs. Trin might go even further. But Tana's eyes didn't allow her to refuse. They were so steady that even if the whole world abandoned her, she still had somewhere to lean. Tan stood, walked to the door, then turned back with a determined voice. "I'm going to talk to the commune officials and the police. What she did, destroying property, slandering you, cannot be ignored. You committed no crime. You have nothing to fear." Han rushed forward and grabbed his sleeve. "Tan, don't make this bigger. I just want things to be peaceful." He turned, cupped her cheek with his palm, and forced her to look directly at him. "Hun, exactly because you want peace, I have to take action." His expression grew serious, far more serious than she had ever seen. "If you stay silent, they'll keep crushing you. They'll destroy the school. They'll destroy your father's honor. And they'll destroy your life." His voice dropped, heavy like the wind before a storm. "I won't let that happen." Han's vision blurred with tears. For the first time in all those dark days, she didn't feel completely alone. Tan pulled out his phone, dialed the commune leader's number, and spoke with unwavering clarity. "Uncle, I need to report something immediately. This is a serious case of property destruction and defamation. I have evidence." Han stood behind him, staring at his broad back, her heart warming with a flood of emotions all at once. Gratitude, fear, tenderness, hope, and something warm she couldn't name. After hanging up, Tan turned to her, his tone gentle again but still firm. From now on, don't endure everything by yourself anymore. Let me handle it. Han lowered her head, her voice small, barely a whisper. But why do you do so much for me? Tan stepped closer, so close she could feel his breath. He leaned down slightly and spoke in the warmest, deepest voice she had ever heard from him. Because I care about you, Han. She froze. Her heart thudded in her chest. Her breath caught for several long seconds. He didn't avoid her gaze. He didn't hide anymore. He spoke again, steady, honest, unwavering. I've cared about you for a long time. And I will protect you to the end. In that moment, all the pain, all the exhaustion, all the suffocating injustice she had endured seemed to melt away. There was only one thing left. His words. And the man standing before her. The only one who didn't abandon her when the entire world turned its back.
Xin chào mọi người, rất vui được gặp lại mọi người trong video của mình. Chúc mọi người có một ngày mới an lành và hạnh phúc. Hy vọng rằng những video của mình sẽ mang đến niềm vui cho mọi người. Hiện tại hôm nay mình kể cho mọi người nghe câu chuyện về người mẹ đơn thân Diệu Hân. Thì sau những biến cố, những khó khăn thì Hân lại vướng phải một rắc rối khi người mẹ kế của Hân xuất hiện. Người mẹ kế này chính là người vợ thứ hai của cha Hân, và kèm theo đó là có một cô con gái cùng cha khác mẹ với Hân. Liệu rằng Hân sẽ phải đối mặt với những khó khăn nào phía trước, Thành có bảo vệ được Hân hay không, thì mời mọi người cùng đón xem ở video tiếp theo nha. Hiện tại những video của mình đang được phát hành vào khung giờ 7 giờ tối và 7 giờ sáng tại Việt Nam. Mọi người nhớ chú ý đón xem để không bỏ lỡ video mới nhất nha. Cảm ơn mọi người đã xem hết video hôm nay. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại mọi người nhé.